This is the Mental Metal Podcast, and I am your host, Coach Matt Thomann. I'm a former athlete, teacher, coach, and athletic director that switched careers after surviving cancer and a stroke in the fall of 2020. But I'm also a dad of a son and a daughter that were successful high school athletes that went on to college. Now I use that experience along with my ICF coaching certification when helping teams, coaches, and athletes from all over the country. Each week, I will pose a specific question that will help coaches of all types better understand mental toughness. In the Mental Metal Podcast, coaches will learn to help their athletes overcome adversity without being the adversity they need to overcome. Hello and welcome back to the Mental Metal Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Matt Thomann. A good episode coming up today. It's a little bit different than usual. I don't have a guest on here, so it's just going to be me doing, and I have no problem continuing to talk by myself. I do that all the time, but there's a reason for it. It's not just me wanting to talk by myself. It is. I recently had asked for some questions. I said, "Hey, I want to hear questions from coaches, from parents, from players, questions that people had about mental toughness and athletics and some situations, what they are seeing and what questions they had." And a pervasive theme that I heard was the word toxic. Parents would ask, how do I get my kid to deal with a toxic situation? Could be a toxic teammate, could be a toxic coach, toxic culture. But then I also had a similar question from coaches. How do I deal with a toxic player on my team? A team that I've heard some coaches call it a team cancer. This kid's a cancer. Coaches were also asking, okay, what do I do about these toxic parents? Maybe they're in the stands, they're doing those things that, toxic parents that spread that toxicity and spreads it out to others and affects, the whole vibe. And they were noticing all these things. What is toxicity? What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about players that would get defensive, maybe lash out. Parents that definitely get defensive, if they're not getting to see their kid play or they feel like their kid's being wronged. And they might think that they are trying to advocate for their kid, but they're doing it in a toxic way, in a negative way. But it's coaches do it as well. Coaches get defensive when they're, not winning games like they wanted to. They know that they're not doing the job they want to, and they get very defensive. They start blaming others, and that's everybody. We start to blame others. We start critiquing others, and also it can get very hostile. Sometimes it's not obvious hostility. Sometimes it is. Some coaches get really, really upset. As you get older, you'll get some coaches that, use language that it's harsh, very hostile. You might get name calling. That's between players, between, coach to player. You might even get it with some parents. And I know that sounds very, very killing kindergarten stuff, saying name calling, but we do it in a more adult way, even though it's not. But it's also, sometimes we use the sarcasm. Sarcasm is a really, really thinly veiled attempt at contempt and letting us, trying to let people think that we know that we're better than they are. And sometimes you see it with kids doing bad body language. Teenagers do this all the time, with the eye roll, the whatever, that type of stuff. It's that negative outward emotions that we see that affect an entire vibe of a situation. And sometimes it's none of those. Sometimes it's just a silent treatment and nobody wants to talk. But it's this toxicity. The reason we're worried about it is because we know the word toxic means poisonous. And when a parent or a coach or a player is talking about a toxic situation or a toxic situation, the worry is that they are going to spread that poison among the rest of the group. So again, some coaches call them a player a team cancer, and somebody that's going to affect the entire locker room. And it's a real fear, right? We don't want to be in toxic environments. We don't like to be in toxic environments. However, they exist. Okay? There's going to be negativity and there's going to be toxic environments regardless of what we do in our life. So I'd like to point out that the word toxic usually means poisonous for something that's been ingested, right? So there is some culpability there on the individual for how they take that toxicity and what they do with it. Like, for instance, the woods, if you want to go for a hike someday, the woods is full of toxic plants, right? There's berries that you can't eat. There's poison ivy that, I don't even know what it does if you eat that, but it can't be good, but you don't even want to rub that on yourself. There's all sorts of toxic plants out in the woods. Do we still go out in the toxic environment that is the woods? Yeah, we do. We just don't eat the stuff that's going to kill us. There's things that are partly toxic and not, like a tomato plant. I love tomatoes. We love tomatoes. You got to have for everything. And they used to think tomatoes that were poisonous. And part of that is because a green tomato and some of the leaves can be very toxic if you eat too many, right? So, but we don't do that. So we have to be very careful about choosing what toxins we ingest and what we do with them, and we're around them, but how do we receive it? And I think that's a big part of it. And then also remember that just because you think a situation is toxic, it could be your perception. Okay. For instance, I have a beautiful sweetheart of a yellow lab. Her name is Jovi. And she is a typical yellow lab in that she loves to eat things, constantly eating. And she's always right there beside you in the kitchen, asking for something, wanting to eat something. And I can't tell you how often we're asking Google, we're like, hey, Google, what can a dog eat blank? And we'll be, okay, yes or no, or in small doses or whatever. And we do that because we know that there's things that dogs can't eat. Don't give your dog, dark chocolate or raisins or ibuprofen. Those things, we know they're toxic to dogs, but they're fine for humans, right? So, but conversely, if you can, get in the fridge and you get this nasty piece of old beef that looks like, I don't know, I don't think we should eat that. We'd get sick. I mean, your dog would be like, I'll have it, I'll eat it, and I'll eat it raw, right? And they're fine with it. So different things are toxic to different people and just what they can handle and what they can do and what they can't. Now, what does all that mean? Does that mean that toxins are good, toxins bad? Well, there are some toxins that we know it's a bad situation. And we're like, this is terrible. We have to get our kid, or we have to change this situation. But I don't think that means we just see something as toxic and just say, oh, I have to get out of this situation. Maybe I could just not ingest it the same way, or maybe I could look at it from a different way. I don't think it means that we just say, hey, I need to remove all toxins from my life, all negative things from my life, because that's not feasible. Just like it's not feasible to remove all toxins that we actually eat. At least it's not for me. There's a lot of things that us humans eat that are technically toxin, like alcohol, sugar, sushi with that extra mercury in there. I know that there's some toxicity there. I get it. I deal with that. I cut it down. I try to limit my intake of those because I know there's some toxins, but I'm not going to go, oh, I'm never going to have another drink of alcohol, or never going to eat any sugar, or never going to eat sushi, right? Some people might, and that's fine. But for the most part, for most people, it's impossible to move all toxins from what we eat. Just like it's almost impossible to remove all toxicity from the situations that you're in for athletics or even your own job. It just doesn't do any good to say, oh, that situation's toxic, I'll never go. You can't do that with your job. You might have to go get another job. So you can't just not go into work because you find a coworker to be toxic for right now. And also, here's something else to remember to, turn the looking glass or took, the mirror back on us is you might be somebody else's toxin, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, just like toxicity is in the eye of the beholder sometimes. So the way you react to situations and the way you react to people you might be their toxic, right? And I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm just saying a lot of things are how we look at it. Well, what do we do with that? Well, again, I don't think we can remove ourselves from all situations that are toxic, but I think that we can understand some situations, understand what we can do in those toxic environments, and understand where some negativity comes from. We're going to talk about conflicts here today and how people react to conflict. And I think the more that we can understand all of that, the more we can become immune to some of this toxic environments and some of that negativity. One of my favorite movies is The Princess Bride. And if it's not one of your favorite movies, it should be. I'm just going to put that out there. I don't say that about a lot of movies, but I feel like it's that important for everyone. It's just, at least for a pop culture reference, you need to know that. This is kind of like, I'm going to bring it up here. And there's this scene where they've got the poison is in one of the glasses and they have this test of will or this wits, the battle of wits. And it ended up not mattering to one guy which goblet had the poison because he was immune to it. He knew he would be immune to it, and it didn't matter which one he drank because he was immune to that toxin, but the other guy was not immune to it. And as inconceivable as that might seem, as a real life idea, I think it works in this situation in the sense that if we can start to harden ourselves, and I guess I don't like the word harden, but understand situations better, we can become immune to a lot of that negativity and a lot of that toxicity, right? So that it doesn't affect us too much. Now, again, I'll say that again, not all toxic situations are equal. There are situations that are very terrible, very negative, and situations that you, your kid, or even as the coach, you need to remove yourself from. I'm not telling you what that line is, but I do think you know it when you see it and when it really starts to make irreparable damage. And I think a lot of conversations have to happen before you just pull that trigger, but they do exist. I'm not necessarily talking about those. I'm not talking about those ones that are like immediate danger and something we can't recover from. I'm talking about the toxic situations that we just don't like it, right? We don't always feel good when we come home from practice, or we don't like this situation, or you feel like the coach isn't doing things your way, and maybe the coach does some of the things wrong in the wrong way and does it. Maybe he doesn't speak in the right way or the right tones or things like that. It hurts. Okay. That might be something that we need to get a little bit immune to and understand better. So yeah, toxicity. Let's start talking about how we can deal with some toxicity in our lives without just hitting the panic button and the eject button and getting out of the situation. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken feathers, or perhaps you've heard it or even said it using a certain 4-letter word. Regardless, coaches love to use this expression as an excuse for why they aren't winning. Honestly, it's a lame excuse, and I'm sorry if that ruffles your feathers. But it's your job as a coach to develop players, not just physically, but mentally. If your athletes lack a skill or mental toughness, it's your responsibility to develop it. But how do you do that with today's athlete and today's culture? How do you do that without breaking them? Well, Mental Metal Coaching now offers professional development for coaches explaining just how to do that. The program is called Ember to Inferno, Building Mentally Tough Athletes, and it teaches real tools and tangible methods that are proven to develop mental health and mental toughness in your athletes. The program is available as an in-person seminar at your school or as a virtual small group coaching format program. Don't wish for mentally tough athletes, build them. Contact Mental Metal Coaching today. Okay. I know I sound like a broken record here, but I am going to talk a lot about focusing on the controllables. It fits in so many situations. There's some things you just can't do anything about. And it might be the way that a teammate acts or a player acts or your coach acts, right? There's very little you can do. There's nothing you can do to control how another human being behaves. But there's an idea called the red car theory, where if I said, hey, how many red cars did you see on your way to work today? And you're like, I assume I did, but I can't I can't remember that I did. I mean, red cars are everywhere. I'm assuming that I saw a red car, but I can't tell you of one specific. Well, now that I've set that in your head, on the way home, you'll probably go, oh, there's a red car. Oh, there's a red car. And you might say, I saw 6 red cars on the way home. Okay. The idea is that when we start to get fixated on something, we notice something. So if you go into a situation looking for toxic comments, toxic behaviors, you are going to see them. You're going to see them in an individual that you think is already toxic. Whereas somebody else might say something toxic or negative and you don't even notice it. But boy, old coach, when he says something toxic, you really notice it. That is what I'm talking about on focusing on the controllables. That is something you can't do anything about. You need to start focusing inwardly on what you can do about it. Is coach talking in a way that I don't approve of to my kid? Or, is this player not acting in a way that I approve of? Yeah, it happens. What can I do about it? And I don't mean as a coach that you can't just, I'm not advocating you just say, well, just get the kid off the team. Because again, I know that has to happen sometimes, but remember that these situations are for the kid, and the best thing for him sometimes is staying in that situation and helping him through it. And that's really hard. I understand that. But you need to start focusing on what you can control, your attitude towards a situation, your effort towards a situation, and really start focusing on those things. And when you start to notice somebody's negativity or somebody's toxicity, try to say, what can I do about it to help the situation that I can control? What actions of mine can help this situation? That's a huge piece in this, is to be able to do that and think about it like that. It's really hard to do. It's not going to happen overnight. I love that circle of control where we start putting things on the inside and we say, here's what I want to focus on. And the rest of it, I don't want to focus on. When you start focusing on things you can't control, it makes you very anxious, very negative. And toxic situations, when you focus on somebody's toxicity or somebody's blame and somebody's defensiveness, it doesn't make you feel good, right? So we want to focus on things we can do something about. Another thing that we often see is toxic that's actually not, or it feels toxic, is criticism. And there's an idea I learned about criticism. Well, so there is a quote that floats around in Facebook and social media that says something like, don't listen to criticism from someone you wouldn't ask advice from, right? Or something like that. And every time it's on there, you'll have all these people saying, yeah, and like and share and all these things. And honestly, it's terrible advice. It's terrible advice. If you are only going to take criticism from people that you already like and seek advice from, you're probably not going to change much. We need to be able to take criticism, listen to it, and use it as information. Now, does some criticism come out toxic? Absolutely. Okay. Some coaches really struggle at delivering criticism in the right way. It doesn't mean the information is wrong. It just means they're delivering it wrong. Should they be better? Yeah, maybe they should. Are they human? Absolutely. That is where we look at that and we go back to the circle of control. I'm getting criticized and it's done in a terrible way, right? There might even be some name calling put in there or just making me feel terrible. Okay. But what can I do about that? I can say, okay, I can't change how they're going to deliver criticism, but I can listen to what they're going to say. And if you have to say something, you can say something, right? It's like, hey, and this is really hard, but you might be able to say, hey, I appreciate what you're listening to, saying, but I don't like the way this is being delivered. And that's, again, when we're talking about a kid, listen to a coach, that's probably not going to happen. But as an adult, that can happen, especially if you got a coach talking to an adult, a parent. That's something that can be done. But my point is, don't just ignore criticism. Use it as information that helps you get better. And another thing that often feels toxic is when coaches are putting kids through some tough adversity, right? Making them putting them in really difficult spots in practices, in games, in all sorts of situations. This is a great method for growth. Right? Coaches know this. A lot of coaches will make practice work so much harder than the game because they want to make games to seem easy. And what might feel toxic in the moment, because it might be a coach yelling at you and really pushing you and all these things, they might purposely be putting this situation together to be very difficult for the players because they know that they're going to go into a hostile environment on a Friday night for a game. And this team is going to be trash talking and things like this. The coach might be doing it on purpose, putting him through that adversity because he knows that adversity is an effort are the path to progress. That's how we get better. And knowing that and knowing that those situations are going to happen helps you when you think about it ahead of time. And one of my favorite things, and I heard this if you listen to a recent episode with Dave Feeney, if you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it because it was a great episode. And we were talking about how he puts his kids through adversity and we have these tough situations. And he says something I've always said is that you want to see if something is happening to you versus for you. And that's a mindset thing. So when you've got this adversity you're facing, it could be what you're calling as a toxic environment. That is, rather than saying this is something that's happening to me, how can I make this as something happening for me? Meaning, how can I use this information? How can I make it better? How can I get better out of this situation? It's focusing on something you can do. It's not so much the criticism and adversity. We can't do anything about those. They just happen. But we can control our attitude towards that criticism and towards that adversity. And again, it doesn't matter who we're talking about. If a coach can be doing this way, like coaches get a lot of criticism, right? And you might feel like, oh, the parents are sitting behind me and it's a toxic environment. I wish they'd just let me coach. Okay. You can't do a lot about that, right? You could stand up and start yelling at them, whatever, but you know that's not going to do any good. You have to do something that you can do something about, right? And your attitude towards it is the only thing you can change. Perhaps they're giving some good criticism, right? Believe that, don't let your ego get in the way. Perhaps they're saying some criticism. Should they be yelling at it like that in a public place and doing it? Absolutely not. But is there some criticism there? Yeah, maybe. Listen to it. And that's a really tough thing to do. Same with that adversity, coaches. Like, the same adversity you're putting your players through, be okay with that adversity being put on you, right? Your kid, a lot of times you have a player, a lot of times a really good player has a lot of attitude with it. It kind of goes with it, the confidence, and goes like that. Well, rather than just saying, if I wish this kid would just do everything I said, it'd be a lot better. And he's making it harder than it needs to be. Well, if he would do that or she would do that, they wouldn't be the player they are today. Right. So how can you take that? What is this doing for you? Not what is it doing to you? Right. How can you use that information? How can you use that situation to your benefit? How can you learn how to coach a kid like that to get the most out of them? So the same thing you're asking for your players to do it for yourself. Okay. So another idea that is going to really help you understand a toxic situation is know that toxic situations often come out whenever we are experiencing conflict. Okay. Conflict just stirs everything up. Kind of like you walk into the woods, you won't necessarily get poison ivy unless you disturb it. Right. So once you stir up that poison ivy plant, then it's going to be toxic and it's really going to be a problem. You go in there walking, you can end up, in bed with calamine lotion and all swelled up and all that stuff. And that's not to say that we shouldn't go face conflict. Just, I want you to understand that conflict stirs up that toxicity. And the first thing I want you to a little idea about conflict is the difference between task conflict and relationship conflict. Two different things here. First of all, task conflict is when team members disagree on the goals or objectives of a project, or on the best way to achieve those goals. So think about everybody on a team. You play in a basketball game, everybody wants to win. So why do you see teammates and players and coaches arguing sometimes? It's not because they don't want to win. They all want to win the same game. They're on the same team, but they're disagreeing on the way to do it. Okay. That's a different kind of conflict than relationship conflict. Relationship conflict, on the other hand, it refers to disagreements about personal traits and differences, and such as personality clashes, and we really don't like each other. Those are two different things. You can have a task. We constantly have task conflict when families. I'm thinking about you going on vacation. Everybody is in the car. You're going to go out in a town that you've never been before. You got the GPS, you're going out to dinner, and all of a sudden you realize you can't get a signal, and it gets very stressful. Everybody wants to get to dinner, right? You got this lobster place on the coast, and man, everybody's so excited about getting to dinner. Everybody has the same goal, but suddenly we don't know how to get there, and we're lost and in a city we don't know. And these people that like each other, their family, are suddenly at each other's throats. Dad's mad and mom's, upset and won't talk now because dad said something mean. And, you got uncle there just blaming everybody. And it's this situation created, or this toxic situation created by the task that we're trying to do and arguing about how we want to do it. And I only bring that up that sometimes we take a task conflict situation that we feel is getting toxic and we start to believe that it's a relationship conflict, and it may not be. You could be the, teammates and you get along with each other, but then we let a task and how we want to do this get in the way. And now task conflict can become relationship conflict if we let it, if we don't address it. But the only reason I'm bringing that up is so that you understand it, because I think knowledge is power. And if you start to realize, hey, calm down, we're all on the same team, we all want to win this game, we're just having some task conflict, we can address it as that. As the coach, it's definitely in your best interest to really keep that in mind. If you start to feel that situation getting negative and toxic over a task conflict, a tough game, or a tough situation where we're trying to learn a new offense or do something, it behooves you to mention that. Say, hey, we're all on the same team. We're trying to work together here. So I think that idea of just knowing the situation can be very helpful in a toxic situation. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken feathers, or perhaps you've heard it or even said it using a certain 4-letter word. Regardless, coaches love to use this expression as an excuse for why they aren't winning. Honestly, it's a lame excuse, and I'm sorry if that ruffles your feathers. But it's your job as a coach to develop players, not just physically, but mentally. If your athletes lack a skill or mental toughness, it's your responsibility to develop it. But how do you do that with today's athlete and today's culture? How do you do that without breaking them? Well, Mental Metal Coaching now offers professional development for coaches, explaining just how to do that. The program is called Ember to Inferno, Building Mentally Tough Athletes, and it teaches real tools and tangible methods that are proven to develop mental health and mental toughness in your athletes. The program is available as an in-person seminar at your school or as a virtual small group coaching format program. Don't wish for mentally tough athletes, build them. Contact Mental Metal Coaching today. No amount of athletic talent or physical ability can overcome a poor mindset. Anxiety, fear, and negativity will always diminish an athlete's abilities and limit their success. If you are not intentionally developing your child's mental toughness, they are not reaching their full potential, period. Mental Metal Coaching provides the individual drills needed to build the positive mindset needed for success on the court and in life. Contact today to schedule a free coaching session and start building mental toughness in your athlete. And now let's get into, I would say, the meat of this episode, and where I really start talking about toxins and team toxins and ways that people react to conflict and how it affects a situation. So when I work with teams, this is one of my favorite situations, or one of the favorite coaching exercises I put them through, is this team toxins. It is on purpose, and it is all to give them understanding on how people, themselves and others, react to conflict. And this information that I'm going to talk about here, it's not my information. It all came from a book by the name is John Gottman, and it's, you're going to laugh at this and what I'm talking about, but it is the 7 principles for making marriage work. Yes, it's a marriage book, but it's a different kind of marriage book. It's phenomenal. Not that the others aren't, but it's one that, well, to give a little bit of an instance on how groundbreaking it is. This guy, John Gottman, he had these couples, and they would come to his little house and spend the weekend together, and he would just audio record conversations. Okay. And this guy got so good at identifying the issues that couples have and the way that they talk to each other, that in 10 minutes I don't know if I get that right, but in a very short amount of time, he can listen to a couple and predict with something like 90% efficiency if they will have a divorce in the next like 5 years. It's kind of creepy, like how good he is. And what does that have to do with your kid and athletics and your coach and, you know, your players and all those things? Well, some other researchers have started to take that information and apply it to other situations, and they found that his work on conflict and human respond to conflict applies to almost all relationships. And so they have started to apply it to business situations, coaching situations, team situations, things like that. And there's a lot of stuff in there. He talks a lot about the ratios on which you would have negative interactions to positive, and bids for connection, things like that. It's all really good. I would highly suggest it's for anybody. This book is really good. One of the better books, one of the best books I've ever read for changing my life and how I deal with people. But the one idea that I'm going to talk about here is he has this idea called the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And it's a biblical reference about in Revelation time about these four horsemen that show the impending apocalypse that is coming. Well, and he came up with that moniker because he came up with four things he noticed in the four different ways that people react in tough situations or in conflict. And they are, in no particular order, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. A little bit about what those are. Some of them are self easily understood. But the first one is blaming, sometimes called criticizing. And this is anytime that someone is verbally attacking the personality or character of another individual. We know what blaming is and what criticizing is. It usually starts with the word you. Okay. You did this, you did that, things like that. The second one is defensiveness. And that is victimizing yourself to ward off a perceived attack and then reverse it. So a lot of times this follows defensiveness. You feel like some blaming is coming, so you get defensiveness, right? And this is very easily seen by things like words that like, it's not my fault. That's not true. Yes, but it's not fair. Things like that are defensiveness. And that's a common reaction whenever something is going wrong. Again, these are all in response to conflict. The third one is stonewalling, and that is withdrawing to avoid conflict. Again, avoiding conflict. But it's not just that. It's also to convey disapproval, distance, and separation. Okay, so things like the silent treatment, one-word answers, or just actually literally removing yourself from a situation, like and saying, I'm done with you and leaving. That's stonewalling. We know what those are, the whole cold shoulder, things like that. The last one, which he says this is the worst of all of them, is contempt. And contempt is, the reason it's the worst is because it's really attacking on purpose. Now, it means to attack with attacking the sense of self with an intent to insult or abuse. So the intent is there. Some of the others, it's not all the intent. Like when you're defensive, it's really protecting yourself. When you're blaming, you're really saying it's somebody else's fault for the situation, or stonewalling, you're just trying to get away. But contempt is intentional. It's on purpose. And sometimes contempt we see as really obvious. Like when you're very hostile to somebody, right? You name calling. That is contempt. And you're really trying to make somebody feel less. That's contempt. But it's also lower key sometimes when we're mocking somebody, or sarcasm. Sarcasm is a a form of contempt. Again, it's supposed to be this cute way of letting other people know that you're smarter than they are, right? And you're really trying to let them know that. But it even goes further than that. Body language and tone are definitely parts of contempt. Now, this is one that I really try to work on with athletes, because I love this when I work with a lot of athletes and I work with a lot of teenagers. And I like to say that this is the teenager spot special, right? Like, this is, kids love the eye rolls, the sneers, shrug it off, things like that. Those are contempt, right? They know they won't get necessarily yelled at for those little things like they would be for some of the words, but they're trying to convey that idea of, I don't really like you, I don't like what you're saying, and you're absolutely wrong. These are team toxins for a reason. These 4 things: blaming, defensiveness, stonewalling, contempt. They're toxins in that if you don't deal with them, if you don't address them, if you don't try to adjust some things, they constantly make the team sicker and sicker. We were talking about toxins, and you can handle a little bit of sushi, right? You can handle some sugar. But if you eat sushi for every meal followed by, a Dairy Queen Blizzard, it's too much sugar, it's too much mercury, and it's going to be an issue. You have to find ways to deal with it. Now, there are some antidotes. Now, luckily, Gottman doesn't just say, hey, here's the problems, good luck. He gives some antidotes. The first one for criticism is, anytime you're going to criticize somebody, be very careful. And this is a good one for coaches when you're talking with players. Be very careful about how the tone. Rather than saying something you need to do, it's something I need you to do, or I would like to see, things like that. Be very positive with what you're asking and actually bring it to them. A kid already knows they messed up a lot of times. So try to be very careful about how you bring it up, right? It matters. Defensiveness. So if somebody's getting, or if you start to get defensive and somebody's placing blame and you get defensive, this one's one you got to look at your own ego and say, hey, okay, well, what did I do wrong? And be okay with apologizing. Now, I never tell people don't apologize for something you didn't do, but apologize for what part you did play. At least you get the conversation, but just make sure that you're just not being defensive where you don't want to listen to anything. Okay. Stonewalling is tough because a lot of times people they practice stonewalling because they're triggered and they really can't listen to anything anymore. And that's a real thing. All right. Coaches understand that if you see a player shut down, the information you might be wanting to give them or try to give them, it's not getting through. I've had some really good coaches on the podcast. It's several. And one of the things that I'm learning that mature coaches are starting to figure out is that there's a time to say certain things and there's a time to not say anything. And what they may not know is that, but they figured out is that when kids get triggers for whatever, and look, you can complain about, oh, kids get triggered, well, you can complain about it all you want, but if a kid is triggered and their heart rate's up and the chemicals are going in their head, they're not listening and they're not accepting anything you say. And there's no point you doing anything about it. Like you complaining about it, yelling at them more is not going to make them tough. They are shut down. And the only thing that's going to help that situation is in a moment to calm down. Right. And if you give them time to go calm down and come back, let them remove to the situation and then come back, you'll be money ahead and time ahead than if you just kept pushing. Okay. Then the last one is contempt. If you have a lot of kids practicing contempt and you see the eye rolling, or if coaches, if you're seeing, you finding yourself do it using that sarcasm and things like that. You need to start building. The antidote for that is building a culture of appreciation. This is where gratitude really comes in. I've heard some coaches, again, with the Feeney, when he started doing some appreciation and gratitude at the end of every practice, that really helps with the contempt on both sides. All right. So this is like a fast, quick idea with all this stuff for Gottman's Four Horsemen or Team Toxins. I get that, but it's an introductory. And if you have never heard of this stuff or aren't aware of it, I would suggest that you read the book or, hire a coach to work on some of this stuff. Parents of athletes know that confidence and belief are fundamental for success. We want them to play without fear and without anxiety, but once those negative thoughts take over, it can derail years of work. Turning that anxiety into belief is similar to building strength and speed. It just takes intentional effort. Well, mental model coaching provides the individual drills needed to build the positive mindset needed for success on the court and in life. Contact today to schedule a free coaching session and start building mental toughness in your athlete. But a couple things about the whole team conflict and the team toxins. Even these things that you're talking about, even just getting this quick and dirty example, it helps you start understanding yourself and others better. All right. That's it. Right. You start to realize that, oh, that person's just being defensive. They don't really hate me. Or this person's just kind of triggered. It's not that they hate me. What we think as sometimes as a toxic situation is someone in self-preservation mode. Understanding that other people are human and they don't always react correctly really helps. Okay. They're just responding to conflict in a very human way. And remember, you respond to conflict in your own way, and you might be someone else's toxicity. Remember that. Now, a warning here about this podcast. Listening to this and listening to me for 10, 15 minutes does not make you a trained therapist. I don't want you to, I don't want you to act like the crazy aunt that runs around at Thanksgiving diagnosing everybody's just because she likes to listen to WebMD, right? I don't want you, even coaches, I don't want you to just go into practice and start diagnosing your players and their response to conflict, right? Now, can you understand and recognize what they're doing and say, hey, and figure out what antidote they need and how you can best facilitate that? Absolutely. Okay. Do that. But just walking around and, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I see this between my spouse, I would not suggest you just go, hey, I listened to a podcast today and start pointing out the ways that they respond to conflict. You're going to get more conflict. Just heads up. But you might be able to say, hey, this is a great book, or hey, listen to this podcast. And you let me do it. I'll save you one here. So just understanding this a little bit doesn't, again, I don't want you to go around diagnosing everybody. I want you to do this for yourself. I want you to understand this and help your practices better, help your situations better. So it just goes back to control. So what can you control? Well, the player. Understand your own toxins. This is huge. This is hard. This takes a lot of work. This can be ugly at times. When I do this with players, this can be difficult, right? To understand that you're human and that you're reacting in such a way and how it makes you feel bad and lets you know that, and you start to figure out that you're doing it to yourself sometimes. It can be in how you must look to others. It's hard, but there's a lot of growth in understanding that. Parents, understand that you have your own ways you respond to conflict, and have conversations about these antidotes with your kids. I think this is okay for the parents and the kids to be talking about it. Employ it at home. You start to feel some of those conflicts at home, unless you're like, I don't know what that would make me think about your family. If there's no conflict at home between parents and kids, I'm hard pressed to believe it. But hey, if you're having that conflict, like most humans in America here, like, address this a little bit. Hey, let's talk about these antidotes and how we can get it. And if you find that to be very difficult and you say, oh boy, it would not go good if I worked with my kid, then that's an okay situation to hire a coach, somebody like me. It doesn't have to be me. If you know your kid is struggling with some of these responses to conflict between them and their other athletes and their coaches, somebody like me can help. Coaches, address the toxins. You don't have to, again, I said, don't call out everybody when it happens, but you can have conversations about them. You can acknowledge them. Again, talk about that task conflicts and say, hey, that task conflict and say, hey, this is going to be tough. There's going to be some emotions going. We know that, right? That's okay. Just address that and then say, hey, we'll try not to get defensive. And really, Jason Welch talked about this in my podcast. If you want to listen to that one, and he was talking about how he opens up his emotions with his kids and how he's feeling, which is huge. The vulnerability there. If you want to talk about how, hey, sometimes my language isn't the best and I get upset and I say things the wrong way. Say that's just me being defensive. And I understand that I'm trying to work on it, right? Open up to them. But whatever you do, however you want to do it, make it a priority. Talk about these things, right? And if you don't believe me, a lot of coaches go find stuff off the internet. I'm on some different Facebook groups and coaches, basketball coaches are always looking for plays and this and what. Go do the same thing, but for some of this mental stuff. Oh, I want my kids' teen toxins and the 4 horsemen. I want to work on that. How can I do that? Well, look it up. Read a book, read this book, listen to a podcast like this one. Bring in a pro, bring in somebody like me or a psychologist or something like that. And I know that it's easier if you're a pro or team or something like that, or a college team, you got a little bit more money or time to do it. But I think it's okay at some point to bring somebody in. It's not always as expensive as you think, and it can be really, really useful. So as a recap, just remember that toxins exist. Accept it. Try to limit them. Try to get yourself immune to them and try to ignore them a little bit. But know that they're there. And that if you can get past some of that toxicity, take that criticism, take that adversity and use it. Always focusing on the controllables. Make sure that you can do what you can. Just because you read this and listen to this stuff doesn't mean others are going to as well. There's going to be bad situations out there, but it doesn't do you any good to just focus on how bad that is. All you can do is focus on your own toxins, your own reactions. Okay? What can I do to make a situation better? Because a lot of times if you get defensive, if you start, if yours is blaming, then that's going to trigger somebody else's defensiveness or contempt or things. So these things feed off each other. And if you can take yourself out of that situation and not have one of these reactions, you can stop that cycle. Just one person. And remember to influence what you can. If you're just the player, work on yours. If you're the parent, work on yours and help try to help your kids with it. And if you're the coach, man, it is your responsibility to help develop some of this stuff. It is not just about athletics. It's not just about wins. And just remember, as I mentioned before, I just want to reiterate, don't exacerbate situations. Don't add extra toxins. Be whatever your role. Try to handle your own stuff. Okay. It's kind of like, I can always remember, it makes me think of when I was a kid and they would always tell you to not smoke, and you shouldn't smoke, kids. I get that. But when they would say a cigarette would have so many toxins in it, one toxin is okay. But if you start getting, every person is employing their toxin in a team and you roll it all up in one cigarette and you smoke it, it's going to be toxic, right? You're trying to take these things out a little bit at a time. Start by removing yours and then help others with theirs if you're in a position to do that. Okay. I hope this makes sense. It's one of the more useful things that you can do with your teams, with your kids, but I understand that it is a complex one. If If you have any other questions, I would love to hear it. Send me an email. Tell me I'm wrong. Ask me more questions if you like an episode like this, and I'll see what I can do and try not to babble as I try to give some advice. So this has been the Mental Metal Podcast, and I'm your host, Coach Matt Thomann. And until next time, remember to believe. Thanks again for listening to the Mental Metal Podcast, produced by Coraggio Media, sponsored by QuickCut, a video management platform for every level of play, and by Mental Metal Coaching, helping athletes learn to face adversity in a spirited and resilient way. The Mental Metal Podcast is created each week to help players develop more mental toughness, and that is something that will help all of us. So help me out and like and share the Mental Metal Podcast with your friends. Until next time, keep forging your metal.